Hello, my name is Max Klein, and I'm a core maintainer of JupyterLab. Today, I'm going to show you how to debug any problem you might run into while trying to extend the Jupyter backend using server extensions. And to do that, I'm going to work through a practical example that has come up in my own work. So one of the many, perhaps too many projects that I work on is something called Jupyter-FS, which is meant to be the next generation file system for Jupyter and JupyterLab. And so recently, I got an issue that apparently Jupyter-FS and JupyterText, which is another extension that converts notebooks into scripts and various other files live as you work on them. I got this issue that apparently Jupyter-FS and JupyterText are not playing well together, which makes sense because both of them do some fairly hackish things to the Jupyter content stack. And tracking some issues down, it appears that the current maintainer of JupyterText has actually done a lot of work recently trying to get JupyterText to be compatible with Jupyter-FS, which is awesome. So, I want to pitch in, I want to help. And he ran into some kind of strange bug where whenever he saves a file, he was getting this error message. So I said I'd take a look, and I started working on it. So the first thing I did was I created my own fork of JupyterText, and I checked out the in-progress branch that MWouts was working on when he ran into that bug. And so the next step is to open it up in an IDE. And my tool of choice for writing and debugging Jupyter code is vscode. So vscode is very powerful, especially in terms of what you can do during debugging, but it is kind of a pain to set up. So I'm going to step-by-step show you how to set it up correctly. Go to my JupyterText repository, open it. The next thing I'm going to do, because it will come in fairly handy just a little bit down the road, is save a workspace file into this repo. Basically, it just lets me define some settings and manipulations within VS Code for like this specific project that encompasses my current work on JupyterText. Text. Looks good. Okay. And the next step will be to configure VS Code for being able to run and debug the actual code in JupyterText. So in order to do that, first we make a new directory in this project called .vscode. It's like just a generic directory where VS Code stores config files. Now we need a launch config. And we can find a template for launch configs for Jupyter projects in Jupyter-FS. So I'll post actual links to these files below the video. But all you really need to get started is what's here at Jupyter-FS /vscode/launch config template. So just take the raw contents of that file, select copy. Back in VS Code, you can just create a new launch and paste. This will just need some light changing up in order to fit this particular project. Next. And that should be all that's needed. You might need to configure an end file and a path to your particular Chrome installation, depending on your actual dev environment. I know that for my purposes I do. I'll go over exactly how to do these things in more detail in another video. For right now, I'm going to skip to the end where this is fully configured for what I need right now. Okay, so now my launch JSON config is all set up. Basically, all I changed was that I, added or uncommented this line about end file because I need a bunch of environment variables. My particular Jupyter environment, because I actually have 6 or 7 different installations of JupyterLab on my computer, and I set certain environment variables in order to isolate them from each other. The other thing that I changed is because I don't actually have Chrome on this computer, I just have Chromium. I have to add the path, the actual full path to the Chromium binary file within the Chromium app. Just give you a peek at what the environment file looks like. Just all the different Jupyter environment variables. So from reading all the issues relating to, or from reading all the material that's been posted on GitHub relating to the issue between JupyterFS and JupyText, has something to do with contents manager. So probably something to do with the save method here. So with that in mind, let's try actually running the code and see what happens. So the launch JSON that we set up gives us 3 debug configs. The first one is JLab backend, which is for debugging any Python code related to Jupyter. Next is JLab frontend, which is for debugging any TypeScript code related to JupyterLab. And the last is JLab all, which will let you debug both Python code and TypeScript code together in a single run. For the purpose of this video's scope, and also because the problem at hand probably has mostly to do with what's going on with the Python backend, we're just going to stick with running the Python backend process for right now. Okay, let's actually run the JLab backend. Okay, so that starts up just a regular JupyterLab server, just the same more or less as if you ran the Jupyter space lab command. And whatever browser of your choice, go to that address that it prints out. Okay, so I have an example notebook here that I'm going to pair with the markdown file using JupyText. See if we can recreate the error. Pair notebook with markdown. And try to save it. And there it is. The dict object has no attribute metadata error. You have successfully recreated it. However, this is not really the most helpful error message. So much better than that will be to set an actual breakpoint and see if we can figure out where in the code this is actually coming up. So if, my hypothesis is it's the JupyText contents manager that's the problem, and specifically the save function. So therefore, the error is probably being raised from here. So let's try that out. And there we go. It is, in fact, breakpoint got hit right there. If we let it run any further, and we see that same error. So that's exactly what's going on. So that's sort of the first hurdle of debugging something that's complicated cleared. We figured out exactly where in the code, or at least the general vicinity in the code of where the problem is. And so now the challenge is to better track that down. So the first thing I'm going to do, I think, is I'm going to stop the debug process right now. I'm going to replace that error with a better error, because basically the problem is, even though the error pops up nicely on the front end, it doesn't really give us as a developer very much information as to what the heck went wrong. So a better example of this kind of error can be found in the base contents manager in the Jupyter Notebook package. So right here. So two things about this are better than the existing one in Jupyter-text. So one thing is that it both logs the error, which will produce a full stack trace of what went wrong that we can then look at, and then it uses error code 500, which means internal server error, as opposed to the current error code 400, which just means bad request. So 500 is probably more accurate for what's going on here, which is essentially, like exactly a problem internal to the backend server. Transplant that code. Save. We'll remove that breakpoint for right now. Let's rerun the debug process. I should be able to just load this. Let's try saving. Okay, so basically we get the same error message. Dict object has no attribute metadata, but in the server output, we can now see an actual stack trace, which gives us more lines to check out. Because the bug that we're dealing with right now has to do with more than one project, we'll actually create a new workspace in vscode that includes both the Jupyter-text project and the project with which it's having a nasty interaction, Jupyter-FS. So we'll save our current workspace, save a copy of it. So Jupyter-text Jupyter-FS workspace. We'll add a folder of Jupyter-FS to that. So now we have the files for both open in the same workspace. So now what we can do is we can look back at that nice stack trace. So we'll set breakpoints line 419 in text. We'll also set breakpoint at line 158 in the contents manager in Jupyter-text. And for good measure, we'll also set a breakpoint here, because I think here's where the error is actually getting raised from. Now we'll go set some breakpoints in Jupyter-FS files. It's likely they're involved somehow. So Jupyter-FS is structured a little weird. So the save function is this wrapped function that uses path second arg, which is from path utils. So we'll set a breakpoint in that. We're also on a set a breakpoint, let me think. That should probably be good to start. So now we will actually run this whole mess, and it should all work.